Welcome everyone today to Thriving Divorce and Separation, a conscious hub for those seeking to move through separation with more calm, more clarity, more ease, and in a way that serves to achieve better outcomes for all involved. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cara Ockenden. I am the founder of Thriving Divorce and Separation and Soul Healing, a former family lawyer, and now I'm in the space of collaborative separation facilitation, supporting couples and individuals to move through the process with conflict resolution processes, education, online programs, as well as one-to-one coaching. All with the idea that we're going to help people and families to move through the process in a way that really sets themselves up for a more thriving post-separation future. Today, I'm really delighted to be here with Sharalyn Drayton, one of Australia's leading specialists in betrayal trauma, relational healing, and compulsive sexual behaviour. She is also the founder of Arise Counselling Solutions and the co-founder of the Women's Healing Sanctuary. Sharalyn has spent more than 2 decades supporting individuals and couples to they navigate the profound impacts of betrayal, grief, trauma, and relationship breakdown. And now she's created a really beautiful healing space with the Sanctuary to help people to move beyond therapy into deep restoration. So without further ado, I'm really delighted to be introducing you today to Sharalyn. Welcome, Sharalyn. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. So I just want to begin today, Sharalyn, just by you just sharing a little bit about yourself, about your background, who you are, and yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So I grew up in a small country town in New Zealand, and I came to Australia for 3 months, but that was many, many years ago. I met my first husband, got married, had 2 children, got divorced, got married again, and I'm still here. Originally, my career was in the corporate sector, but and I was in human resources and advertising, but I always felt there was more. So I eventually trained as a counsellor, and then I journeyed with a close friend who had cancer and lost her life to cancer, and that prompted me to then train further as a hospital chaplain. And it was while I was doing this work that I started to realise that many of the women I was seeing were all telling me stories about their relationship difficulties, their issues with their husbands, with addiction, and how hard it was for them to find support or even someone just to talk to. Because a lot of this stuff you can't really share with family or friends, especially when sex addiction's involved, because it's something that you don't even understand. So it's a very isolating place. So this led me to wanting to work with these women, which of course then led me into facing the issues of addiction in my own family. And that ultimately led me to setting up my own practice as a counsellor. And as you said, that's where I specialise in working with sex addicts, and particularly with the partners who are experiencing betrayal trauma. So I ended up training in the USA, and now I also train and supervise other clinicians in the Asia Pacific region who work in this field. And it was working with traumatised women. Of course, I understand how difficult it is for women to self-care, particularly when, they're busy caring for everybody else. So, many of the women I work with are in deep distress. And yet they still have to keep functioning as normal. There's still kids to get to school and laundry to do and meals to prepare and shopping to be done and bills to be paid. And many of these women are also working outside of the home. So there's just no time. And women are absolutely brilliant at putting themselves at the bottom of their priority list. So, yeah, keeping all of that, at the front of mind, I realise how hard it is. That, there's already a complexity for women with betrayal trauma. Then adding that in as well, it creates another level of difficulty and challenge.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. And so in your work now in supporting, not just women, but also you work with couples, as I understand, in the betrayal space, and, ultimately where some may be separating or contemplating separation. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you've done there? I know that you've kind of moved on a little bit now from that space, but in terms of what you've done in the past and how you and those you trained can support people with that.
Okay. So, as I said, sex addiction and betrayal trauma is a unique experience. Sex addiction is addiction, the same as any other addiction, but it's personal in a way that the other addictions aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a huge relational component to it that needs to be addressed in order to heal relationships. So the work that we do, generally, I work with the partner. I don't work with the couples anymore, but I work with another therapist. And so usually the way it works is I work with the betrayed partner. My colleague is working with the addict, and the four of us come together for a process which is called full therapeutic disclosure. And it can begin the healing process by creating a platform of honesty that's guided and supported, where the partner can have a voice around her experience, and where there's an opportunity for stepping into a new relationship, one that's based on honesty and truth, knowing what's gone before. So it's a profound and traumatic process for all parties involved, and so it's one that really needs to be supported by therapists or clinicians who are well trained in this field. There's a lot of potential for harm, so we need to make sure that everything is done properly, everybody's appropriately prepared, and that we address all these issues with integrity and as much care as possible, and doing the preparation, making sure everybody's fully prepared. The outcomes can be really positive. I've just in the process of collating the results of a survey that we've recently run in this area, around full therapeutic disclosure, and 97%, I think, or 95% of people who've participated in a full therapeutic disclosure say afterwards it was the right thing to do. And that's substantiated by previous research out of the US that says the same thing. So I think, in order to move forward from sex addiction and betrayal trauma, for people that want to stay in relationship, it's important to have honesty, because nothing can be rebuilt without that. So this we call this process a right of truth, and it really establishes the playing field moving forward, so that both parties can come together, work on their own healing and on the relational healing, from a platform of honesty. So it's challenging, really challenging, but the potential for post-traumatic growth is phenomenal.
Yes, and I'm hearing that, and something that obviously it is a really traumatic process when you're moving through that breakdown of trust and that betrayal, and I've witnessed how that breakdown can, unfortunately, when people move through, choose to separate thereafter, can actually really taint the separation process further and re-traumatize it, as you've kind of mentioning and touching on there, the risk of re-traumatization, because trust is really foundational for any successful relationship. Without it, you don't have much. And so what I loved about what you said there is how the full disclosure process is about supporting people to set up, a new relationship, and, not what's been, because it really is a new relationship, but the past relationship was colored with, deceit and dishonesty in the space, and with the complexity of addiction, right, which is, another whole other kettle of fish in the space, and of course that real hurt that comes with that. And so I know that when I spoke to you previously, you mentioned about processes in place as well for those who may be contemplating the separation process, and I'm just curious as to how that process may support people who are making that decision or considering that decision, to set them up to ensure that this pain does not then, see the separation process go completely sour in a way that's, traumatic, not just for the people or the parents involved, but children who are also a part of this family system and need to move forward, with the idea they still love both parents, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad parent through this, for what they may have challenges with. And so, I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit into that.
Sure. One of the processes that we offer is called a therapeutic separation. And that can be something that can be profoundly helpful. So look, nothing blows up your world like discovering that your life partner's been acting out sexually outside of your relationship without your knowledge or consent. Nothing blows up your world like that, because everything you thought you knew is suddenly called into question. Everything you thought was real is called into question. And then partners, they're on top of all the distress, they're deeply confused. Like, how did this happen? And how did I not know this was happening? And what's wrong with me? And, I should have known. It is really, really challenging. So sometimes, and then you've got an addict who's hopefully in recovery, but it's early. So they're in, a really difficult space as well. Hopefully they're getting the right help. They're seeing a therapist, they're going to their 12-step meetings, they're getting support, and they're starting to wake up. It takes them time to develop empathy, because addiction's about denial and minimization and compartmentalizing. So it takes time for both parties to be able to start to even really think about a new relationship, because they're still trying to figure out what happened to the last one. So I think sometimes a therapeutic separation can be a really helpful tool, because it's an agreement that's worked out generally with the therapist, to make sure that both parties get what they need. But it's about separating for a period of, generally it's for a period of time, so that it can be 6, 9, 12 months, with the idea of coming back together again at the end of that time. So both parties agree to everything that's in the therapeutic separation, and that will be, who's going to live where, how kids are going to be cared for, what access there is going to be, who's going to pay for what, how life is going to continue in the best interest of all parties, including children and any other family considerations. And then both parties sign off on that. So what I love about it is that it creates a space for everyone to kind of just bring the temperature down. And so that they then are able to, communicate without as much conflict, and just have a safe place to retreat to while they figure out what next. So it's a really nice process, because it is all agreed. Everybody's on board, and it really does help to minimize the conflict. I've heard it referred to as a reset button, and I quite like that, because I think just being able to have that space, in order to kind of breathe and figure out what you need without and because one of the complexities with sex addiction and betrayal trauma is it's a huge attachment rupture. So you've got, this is your person, and you want to go to them to feel better, but they're also the source of your pain. So it's confusing, and that's a huge internal conflict between your own attachment system and your safety system. So sometimes a therapeutic separation can be, can be really helpful.
And I was, I'm glad you mentioned and spoke into the attachment rupture there, because I was also about to mention how in that space, when they're first experiencing the betrayal, and for both parties, so they're both, because of the attachment, their nervous system activation is going to be up here, and in that survival mode space. And that's where, again, they're just so much more prone to conflict, because neither of them are functioning at full cognitive capacity in that space.
Yeah.
And so there's just so much risk for things to escalate and become worse than perhaps they need to be. And sometimes just taking that space apart can really address any sort of, those sorts of risks, allow both people to feel a bit more safe, in their nervous system, even though I know it can be hard for some people to have empathy for the person who may have committed the betrayal. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, it's about, we need to support both people to show up in the way that is going to make the process constructive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not about waiting for him to get better so that she gets better. And I use he and she as pronouns. That's not to say all addicts are male and all partners are female. That's definitely not the case. So I apologise if that's upsetting for anybody. It's just convenient and it's force of habit, unfortunately. But I think, it is such a difficult space. So I think anything that can help take the pressure down and give them both time, because I always say, if she's waiting for him to get better, or the partner is waiting for the addict to get better, excuse me, in order to feel better themselves, ultimately they can just sort of become a hostage to the process. So, I think it's really helpful for partners to look at start to look at their own needs. And as I said at the beginning, that's hard for women to do because they're busy taking care of everyone else's needs. But this is an opportunity for them to start to look at their own needs and what healthy boundaries may be, and how they can learn some healthy communication to get those needs met. So there's a lot of potential for positives in what feels like a completely impossible, almost unsurvivable situation.
Yes, thank you. And I think there's a couple of key points that you've touched on there as well, supporting people to actually start to get clear on what their needs are, because many people struggle with that. They're like, I don't even know what I need. I don't even know what I'm feeling. And, I think this skills gap in healthy communication is huge on a whole within society, and being able to
Absolutely.
not necessarily, because people might think they're communicating their needs, but they're not doing it in a way that's constructive. And so it's like two people just going there, one person's going this way, one person's going this way, and they never quite get there, even though they might be trying their best to do so, right? I think that's a really important piece as well. And often I find that people assume that when something, so traumatic occurs in a relationship breakdown, which is not necessarily separation, but there's a breakdown in the relationship, that improving the communication and improving the relationship through that process is not possible. And, for some people that's true, because sometimes you don't have two people who are willing and have capacity to do so, but it's certainly not always true. And a lot of people do have capacity and desire to do so. And where that exists, well, then there's profound potential, like you say, for that post-traumatic growth to occur, and for people to come back, even if they don't stay together, but for them to have better skills to be able to navigate that post-separation phase better if you're raising children as well. So I think I think it's phenomenal work that you're doing, and it's certainly complex and specialized, but it's wonderful that you're out there doing that to support people who do make that choice, that they do want to use the experience in a way that's, productive and that helps maintain the family in some way, shape or form moving forward.
Yeah, well, as I said, the potential for post-traumatic growth is huge. And regardless of what happens, whether the relationship survives or not, partners go on to have great lives. I have a book coming out, I hope, later this year, which is Stories of Hope for Betrayed Partners. And many of my clients have actually written their stories for me. And it's just beautiful to see outcomes. So I started 5 years, so I've got 5 years of outcomes. So it's great to be able to see the relationships that did survive and how and why and where they are today, and the relationships that don't survive, to see where those people are now. And they've all gone on to have great lives. So as I said, the potential for post-traumatic growth is huge, but none of it's easy.
No.
And I think that's why it's so important to get the right help, because with the right help, you can do the work, do the processing, and work through the issues that have been not helpful for you, in order to I believe that this is a pathway to your own growth and healing.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of opportunity and potential, but at the beginning, it can feel completely unsurvivable. It's a really tough addiction to have to deal with.
Yeah, and it's
For all
troubling as
parties.
well. Yes, and I imagine as well, there's a lot of outside voices that probably come in and will have their opinions about what you should do in this situation, and more often than not, it is leave. And that's not easy to handle either. And I did just want to speak into as well as how you mentioned that it's not easy. And that's something that it's a common misconception as well about people who may come together more collaboratively after big relational ruptures, is this idea that somehow people being soft and, you're not having boundaries, and that you're giving too much. Whereas from my experience, when people are working more collaboratively post-rupture or post-separation, this is often the hardest work that you do, right? Because you're actually having to grow and move through the pain as opposed to distracting the pain, and actually look at the real issues that are underneath and address them for both people, not just the one person, right? Because there's two people in that situation, and the person who's had their trust broken has a lot of work to do to, regain their trust in themselves and to choose to trust again, right? That's a huge thing for someone to move through.
It sure is. But learning to trust yourself is a really good place to start.
Yeah, yes. And it's not easy. Like I can understand that. No.
It all gets completely blown up. And you're right, we live in a disposable culture. If something's not working, you throw it out and you get a new one. And there's also a lot of victim blaming in our society. So there's this idea that if he acts outside of, and again, I'm using the pronouns of he and she, but if he acts out outside of the relationship, then you must be doing something wrong. And again, if you don't, I hear stories from people who've gone to therapists for help, who've been told, well, you need to be more sexy and, et cetera, which, that's got nothing to do with anything. No. Partners don't cause this, they don't cause it, they can't cure it, and they can't control it. It's an addiction. It's a compulsive behavior. So there's that, well, let's find out about what you need and who you are and how you can have healthy boundaries and, what are your values and how do you live within your value system. And so it's really empowering, part of the work that I love is about empowering women to make better choices for themselves. And as you said, we don't know what we need. Most people don't know what they need, but they know women know what everybody else needs. So it's a bit of a moment when they start to think, oh, hang on a minute.
Yes, and the other thing I would add to that is most people don't know how to actually, what a healthy boundary actually looks like or is. And that's a huge challenge as well, as people have misconceptions about what that looks like and how we actually put in place boundaries. So that's, an important point to add there as well. And once people learn that, it could be a game changer in relationships as well.
We run training workshops for people, both I do training and supervision of other clinicians. A colleague of mine runs brilliant boundaries workshops for clients and clinicians. So really educating people around what boundaries are. A lot of people use boundaries as something punitive, as weapons, and that's not what they are. Boundaries are not about other people; they're about you.
Exactly right.
So, but it should be taught in schools. This stuff.
It should be, and there's something even for myself that I only really became present to, I know, in more recent years myself, in terms of so that's where I'm going wrong. It's like you don't know what you don't know, right? And exactly. I think that's an important point as well. And I also like the point that you make about how, when it comes to addictions, this applies to all addictions, not just sex addiction. It's not about the other person. It's internal to the person who's having that experience and, whatever complexities are in that space and the drivers and influences, there's similarities across people, but there's also differences in terms of what, trauma or aspect you may be dealing with in an individual, and that's got to be their work, right, at the end of the day. So, and I won't profess to be an expert in addictions either, because I'm certainly not. But yeah, thank you for sharing into that. And I love that that's an option for people to be able to explore in this space. And because I'm a big believer in options based on people's desires and goals which are going to be different across the board. And I love that you're empowering people to say, hey, actually, I would like to see if we can work through this differently, regardless of what others think, and and that they have someone to help them with that. I'd love to now speak a little bit into your sanctuary. I am a big fan of what you're putting out to the world there and the service you're providing. Would you like to speak a little bit into that?
Sure. So how did the sanctuary come about? It's a question I get asked a lot. And yeah, it's a sad story because a few years ago I lost my oldest son, Ryan, in a car accident. And yeah, as you can imagine, I was absolutely devastated with grief. And what I discovered, and I mean, I had a lot of support and it was great, but life just kept getting in the way. And, I noticed that it was making me angry and resentful because I just wanted to be with my son. I just needed time to try and figure out how to breathe again. So my friend Janine, she recommended that I go to a women's retreat in New Zealand. And she'd been going there. So she was working in death and dying. She was working with cancer patients, terminal cancer patients, and she'd been going to this place for a few years to self-care, to kind of recharge her own batteries. And she said, you need to go there. So it was a bit of a leap of faith, but I was desperate. So I did. I went there, and it was a really incredible experience. It was a really profound time for me because for 10 days I didn't turn on a light or a TV or anything. I just lay on my bed and I watched the moon go down and the sun come up. And I hung out with my boy, and the women at the retreat, they fed me and freed me just to do what I needed to do. It was an extraordinary time, and I believe that it was integral in helping me start to build a new relationship with my son. It was a space where I was able to not come to terms, but to start to really sink into the what and the why, and trying to figure out how I was going to survive this. So while I was at that retreat, I also started to write to Ryan, and that after it ultimately became a book called Finding Tomorrow, which is available through the Women's Healing Sanctuary website. But anyway, and the money from that goes to the sanctuary. But so what happened was 2 years from that time when I went to that women's retreat, Janine and I were sitting at the place where I'd scattered my son's ashes, and we were just talking about the difficulties that women face, and some of the issues, and how great it would be if there was a place in Australia like that place in New Zealand. And that was when we decided we were going to start what became Women's Healing Sanctuary. So it was a real moment, because it was like time stopped and we looked at each other and we're like, wow, what just happened? We both knew at some deep level something significant had just happened in that moment of decision. Anyway, a week later, Janine went to New Zealand and she volunteered at that women's retreat as their manager to learn how to run a women's retreat. And because I've got the business background, I swung into action to become a registered charity. So almost 2 years to the day after we were sitting where we'd scattered Ryan's ashes, we opened the door to Women's Healing Sanctuary. That was 5 years ago. So today, Women's Healing Sanctuary is Australia's leading residential facility for women experiencing grief, loss, burnout, exhaustion, just pretty much all of us, really, one way or another. And it's a beautiful 7-bedroom home on 6 peaceful acres in the Port Stephens region of New South Wales. And it's just a safe place for women to be able to step away from life's demands and reconnect with themselves.
Yeah, beautiful. And I understand as well that you also run day retreats, so others can come in and facilitate day retreats or weekend retreats as well. And that the space, whilst you have a passion for supporting women, there's also support for men offered from the space as well. Would you like to speak a little bit into that?
Yeah, well, we do, although the sanctuary is a residential retreat for women, and, so Janine's the live-in manager. So my co-founder, Janine, is now the live-in manager. She lives on site and cares for the guests and takes care of everything. Everything's provided, all meals, everything's provided, which is great. So women can do as much or as little as they want. And if they don't want to do anything, they don't have to. But most women are terrified of doing nothing. So, we can organise yoga or massage or whatever. So there's that as an option. We also run workshop programs. So, for example, I run what I call Passage to Power, which is a 3-day retreat for women moving through betrayal. It doesn't have to be sexual betrayal, but, wanting to step into their power from, and recover from the things that have caused them pain. We run community morning teas every month. They're free, so women can come, and there's usually a guest speaker or there's something happening, and they've proved really popular. As part of, because we're completely self-funded, it's part of our fundraising. The people who pay to stay there pay for the women who can't afford it. So our mandate is to support all women, regardless of their financial capacity. And we have other providers come in and who'll hire the whole facility to run. We've had yoga workshops and other clinicians come and run programs. So that, which is great. So it's a beautiful place for that as well. But as a rule, it's predominantly residential retreats. We run grief workshops regularly. They're very popular. And they're with a guided grief therapist. But yes, we also do run a couple of times a year. We run workshop retreats for men through the Relational Recovery Centre Asia Pacific. So those retreats are facilitated by a trained psychotherapist. And some of the men who come to that retreat, those retreats are partners of some of the women who stay with us. Excuse me, I'm just going to cough. And I think as a board, we decided to support these workshops for men because we know that as men heal, women feel safer.
Yes, yeah.
And it's really great. And I've had great feedback from some of the partners of men who've been through the workshops, who've really been delighted with the opportunity that their spouses have had to do this deep healing work themselves.
Yeah, wow, thank you.
Yeah. So it's great that we can do that. But we have a policy that when there's women at the sanctuary, we do not allow any men on site.
Yep.
And when there's men on site, there's no women on site.
Yeah, and I think that's a really beautiful policy you have there to ensure, emotional safety of both, that when they're doing that deep work and that deep healing and recovery on both sides of the spectrum. And I do love that you do provide space, to create that mutual healing, because you're quite right. There needs to be mutual healing in order for there to be, I suppose, whole healing in relationships. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's just I just love the idea of the sanctuary. I love how it's like a give back service as well. Those who can afford it can pay it forward for the next, and, the beautiful opportunities it has. And, I'd love to get there sometime. I've told you this before, and it is on my to-do list.
Always be
and
welcome,
perhaps,
Cara.
yes, because it just sounds amazing. And like a beautiful retreat space as well for those who are looking to facilitate. And I do have some beautiful friends who do host retreats as well. And like I mentioned, you're first on my list to send off to people. Check this one out. It comes with a beautiful cause as well.
Absolutely. We're just about to do, next year we're undertaking some renovations of our studio space to expand the size of it so that we'll be able to run more day programs.
Yeah, beautiful.
But at the moment we've got 7 beds and a 2-bedroom manager's apartment. So there's the facilitators of workshops are hosted with her. But with the day programs, we'll be able to offer more, which will be great. But we also have our angel sponsorship program. So 100% of funds donated to the Angel Sponsorship Program go towards supporting a woman in need. And it's just been amazing. So and whoever donates becomes a sanctuary angel, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And then so a woman who needs a sponsored stay or partially or fully sponsored stay, it's a gift. It's been paid for by somebody else. So that becomes a big part of their own healing process. And so far, the data that we've been collecting for the last 5 years, over 30% of the women that stay with us are on partially or fully sponsored stays through that angel program. But the other beautiful bit of data that we now have is that 97% of the women who stay with us report improved mental health following a stay. And the research shows that when a woman self-cares, everyone in her circle of influence benefits.
Yes. Yeah. And yet that makes a lot of sense as well, because certainly, if you're in that state of not at capacity, your bandwidth's completely, you're tethered. You can't fill from an empty cup, right? You just can't. And certainly not well. Like, we can't be the best ideal parent when we're in that space. I mean, that's just how it is for everyone. So yeah, that's really incredible outcomes that you're seeing there. And if I can ask you, if you had a tip for someone moving through separation in terms of dealing with separation grief, because that's, it is a grief process. You're grieving, but you're grieving someone who's living, not dead, which can be sometimes more complex. What would you?
It is, yeah. It is. It's called ambiguous grief. So you're, and you see it with dementia as well, where somebody's. I knew a young woman who lost her husband suddenly, and she was telling me about her experience of being a widow. And as she was talking, I realised this is what partners go through. It's just that he's not dead and he's probably sleeping in the bed next to you.
Yeah.
But it's like, everything you thought you had is gone.
Yeah.
And with the discovery of sex addiction, it's everything is then called into question. Everything is in doubt, the whole relationship, because you've discovered this parallel universe that's been tracking alongside what you thought was real.
Yeah.
So it's like having a death without the death. So, which also means there's not an end. There's no ending. So you're working through something that is continuing with no guidelines, and you don't know where to get help. This is still a pretty under-resourced area. There's a lot more support in the US. It's certainly changing now in our region. Fortunately, there's a lot more people who have trained or are doing the training, which is wonderful. And there are a lot more. So there's two trainings. There's to be a certified sex addiction therapist or a betrayal trauma therapist. So the training's important in both of those first, because they're both very different, obviously. So my top tip would be to make sure that you get the right help from somebody who has done the right training and really understands all the different nuances in this situation, because the grief is phenomenal. But as I said, he's probably still alive and sleeping next to you. So as I said, the sanctuary, we run a lot of different workshops. We run a lot of grief processings, and all of that is really helpful. But I think the first thing I would say to any betrayed partner is give yourself the gift of time. Don't make any big decisions while you're still in the emotional car crash.
Yes.
Give yourself time and space.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes. And I'm fully with you on that, because that's common advice that I give my clients as well as a top tip. It's a way I help you is help you find, in some respects, find the right people to support them with the right things at the right time, and help them understanding what they may be needing, because I'm very clear in myself that I'm not an expert in everything, right? Nobody is, and I'm not the right person for every aspect of a separation process, but I can help point you in the direction who someone who is, and it's really important that you do align with the right people for the goals that you have.
Yeah.
If you've already made the decision that you want to fully separate, then, that may be a different person to someone who may be helping to keep you together. And having someone to be able to help you process and not make those rash decisions that people often make when they're in that high emotional state is really important as well, because that's where people, tend to make, missteps in the process that tend to make things worse rather than better.
Yeah.
And so I fully agree with that statement that you said there, and I think that's a great tip for people to understand, and knowing that there are people there to support you regardless of where you're at and what you're choosing to do with the decision that you might want to make moving forward. So thank you. And now tell me, Sharalyn, how can people reach you if they're wanting some support?
Well, I think the best thing to do is with the Women's Healing Sanctuary, with Arise Counselling Solutions, is just check out the websites.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way to contact through the websites, probably the best thing. But look, just get resourced. Anybody going through betrayal trauma, get resourced. There's a lot of stuff online now. There's some great books and tools and tips and tricks. The first part is to create safety and stabilization, and just find a way to kind of bring the pressure down, so you get your feet back on the ground and get the ground to stop moving. And once you've got that sort of safety and stabilization and safe people for support, and getting resourced will help enormously. So reach out. Wonderful. And find those resources. As I said, there's a number of good therapists around Australia now who are offering workshops and support groups and all sorts of things. So getting those resources will help enormously.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharalyn. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. I think, I'm so grateful that we've had the opportunity to do this and put your work out to the world, because a lot of people don't know that this exists. Certainly before I met you, I did not know that this process was an option for people. And often education and awareness of what's available is the first step to getting people resourced. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm being really grateful.
Pleasure. As I said, I call this the silent addiction because nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shame and misunderstanding around the fact that it is an addiction like any others, but with more complexity. So it's great to thank you for the opportunity to share a bit more about it and to talk about Women's Healing Sanctuary. And, if all else fails, you can go to the Women's Healing Sanctuary and give yourself some space and grace.
Yes, absolutely. That's sometimes the hardest step, isn't it?
It sure is. But,
so
when you don't know how to breathe, sometimes in order to make the right decisions, you've got to give yourself that space. As you said, put your own oxygen mask on first.
100%.
Because the decisions that you make at this point can affect the rest of your life. And it's hard to make those decisions when you're experiencing so much trauma and confusion and pain.
Yeah.
So anything that you can do to kind of support yourself and give yourself a bit of space and a chance to create some safety.
Yes.
A bit of space to stabilize and get some good support, it's going to benefit everybody in the end.
Yes, I agree. I always say to people, it's about getting the wise owl on board, because often the wise owl goes to sleep when we're in that space, and we want to make sure we can make wise decisions, right?
Absolutely.
But in any case, again, thank you so much. And yes, I will pop this up online for everyone to see, and hopefully we can spread the word there for you, Sharalyn.
Right. Thank you. And thank you for what you do.
Thank you.